Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I will be interviewing a number of amazing people and simply having a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive in. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's S-E-E changehappen.co.uk. You'll be able to catch up with all of the shows on iTunes, Spotify, and of course, all of the other usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 9 with the title, A Perspective from the First Black, Openly Gay, Now Retired Police Officer. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to be joined by Gamal, affectionately known as G. And I first met G when we both spoke at a mentoring day for Sussex and Surrey Police Forces back in 2019. G describes himself as a diversity and dignity facilitator, and who says his superpower is invisibility. So hello, G. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. So tell me, why do we need a more open dialogue on race?
I think we need a more open dialogue because there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of emotions, deep emotions like anger, frustration, fear, all this in this mix that is in the middle of this dialogue. And until we get through that, we can't get to the point where we can start to talk to each other. And what I try and do is I try and be a bridge through those emotions to navigate that stuff so that we can get to a place where we can actually hear each other rather than tell each other. That's the big thing for me.
Because I'm white. Whilst I know people of all skin colors, ethnicities, and races, I predominantly have, I suppose, white friends in my close circle, and I see a lot of dialogue on Facebook and in the media and things that people are kind of shocked by this sort of kind of the passion that's come out. Where's this come from? Where's this been bubbling into? We as white people thought it was kind of okay, but we got it wrong, didn't we? Where did we miss? What did we miss here?
I like to flip that question. I think what white people have missed is what it means to be white. Right? We ask people of color, like myself, black people, what is racism like to you? And we're expected to be the medicine and the cure. Right? But the real question that I think is coming out now, and from some of the dialogues and conversations I've been having, is that white people are now getting to that point of saying, hang on a minute, what does it mean to be white? What does privilege actually mean? You know, what does this mean? And that's the key question, because once you start to get that, the conversation can then start to flow. In
Brilliant.
The same way, you know. Yeah.
Completely. And I think when you've never experienced a lack of privilege, whatever that may be, you really don't understand what the impact of that is when people glide through life without ever questioning who they are, their lived experience. It just becomes okay. And many people don't realize what it's like not to have that privilege, do they?
No, they don't. It's the way I describe it is like there's two boxes, one box on top of the other box. And there's a group of people that live in the top box. And in that box, they don't see any of these issues. But it's their box, and they look around, and when the people in the bottom box are saying, this is what it's like to be in the bottom, they're sort of like, we don't get that, because they don't even acknowledge that the bottom box exists. It's almost like, in my world, I can't see this. So what you're telling me doesn't make sense. Right? And the barrier is, how do we build a bridge between those two boxes that can move the boxes next to each other or even integrated with each other rather than one on top and one on the bottom?
And I love the words you use there, because one thing I've started talking about recently in the D&I space when I talk is about building this empathy bridge. So what I need to do is take a position for my lived experience and your experience, so I can create a bridge between our two experiences. So I can sometimes maybe use something I can relate to that I can apply it to what you're saying. Otherwise, all I do is I hear you, but I can't apply it. I don't have a reference point. So this is this empathy bridge that you use the word bridge, and I love that. And I think we'll try and do is create this bridge, because often I'm sure you find this as a person with a minority characteristic, if you like, you seem to be the one doing all the empathy. And actually, you want to share that responsibility, so we both meet in the middle of the bridge, rather than coming to my side or coming to your side all the time.
Yeah. And one of the things I always add to that is that I always try to remove the word understanding, right? Because I think that word understanding becomes a big barrier to that building that bridge, right? You will never understand the world I live in, no matter how much I try and describe it. Right. So it's not about understand. It's just about, to me, it's about appreciating that we live in different worlds. I remember a conversation I had with a senior police officers a few years ago, and they were talking about trans issues, and they said, I really don't get trans issues. I can't get my head around it. And I said, it's not yours to get. And she looked at me and she goes, what do you mean? I said, all you have to do is appreciate that it's somebody else's world. That's the world that they live in. You don't have to get it. You don't have to understand it. You just have to appreciate that it's different to your world. And that's what people want, to be appreciated, to be recognized for who they are, not who you think they should be.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, and that's completely true. When you talk about identity, you don't have to get someone's identity. You just have to embrace the fact that they have an identity, and it's important to them. Exactly.
And also to recognize.
I class myself as non-religious, but I don't try and disagree with somebody who has a faith or a belief, because that's important to them. I don't have that, but I accept and I recognize and I celebrate the fact that makes you special, and that that's who you are, and I need to value you, including that element of your life.
Yeah, and you just highlighted the other thing for me is that identity is not fixed. We all have multiple identities. Looking at this whole scenario and this movement that is happening at the moment, and I can look at it as a black man. I can look at it as an ex-police officer as well. So, there's so many different hats that I can use to look at this scenario. And I can look at it as a facilitator. So I think the other thing is recognizing that our identity is not fixed. And sometimes I could be speaking to you, but I may be speaking to you as a facilitator, but you might be hearing me as a black man. So then the conversation gets kind of lost. So I think it's about being clear of where we're speaking from and how we're speaking.
Yeah, and in a parallel way of bridging to what you've just said, I get that, because often I see people talking to me as a trans person, rather than talking to me as an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, a speaker, a trainer. They're seeing my primary identity of, she's trans, as being, and then there's all these thoughts in their head about whether that they're confused by that or not before I have to wade through that. So what you're saying there is, this is building my bridge to you, is trying to relate to saying people are judging you as a black man first, or a gay man first, or sometimes a gay black man first, before they understand your perspective, intelligence, your insight, etc., etc.
Yeah. And that's why I say invisibility is my superpower, because one of the things I'd like to think I'm good at is when I'm facilitating groups, I get to a point where they forget that I'm black. They forget that I'm a gay man, and they get so engrossed in the conversation that I fade into the background and can work with the conversation. And to me, that's the beautiful thing about the work I do.
I just think of you as G. But I don't erase your gayness or your blackness. I don't erase that, because that's part of you. So as far as I'm concerned, I would never describe you as my gay black friend. You're G. You're my friend. But I understand that if I need some insight, and perhaps some of the conversation we're having today, I know you're a great person because you have the insight and the lived experience that is valuable for the world, not just me.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about, relationships like yours and mine, Joe, is that what I like about my life is I've managed to meet and form relationships or friendships with people from across a wide spectrum. And to me, it's not what a person is, it's who they are in their hearts. What do they stand for? What are their values? That's what I like to connect with. Yeah. I'm not about whether they're this or they're that, but actually, do you believe in humanity? Do you believe we work together? Do you believe we are one? That's what's important to me. One of the things you picked up then is one of the things I've been working on recently is that there's a phrase people use, which is actually quite insulting. When people say things like, and I've had it was said to me yesterday, actually, and says, when I see you, I don't see your color. And I find that phrase, my color is a very important part of my identity. You don't have to judge me by it, but recognize that it is a part of my identity. So when you don't see that, you actually don't see a part of me.
Completely. And I say that about many, many different people. Yeah, it's whilst I don't want to be known as Joe the trans person, I want you to know the fact that that is part of my identity, and that is what gives me some strength. And it's because I'm sure you have resilience inside you that it's come from your lived experience, and that's important to celebrate, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the things. Sorry, I was going to say one of the things, and I don't know whether it's similar for people of the trans community, but one of the things for me is I have had to work hard to value my blackness, to value my gayness. I've had to. It took me to the point of suicide. I didn't actually come out until I was in my 40s. Early 40s. And the reason why it took me so long is because I was listening to all the negative messages in the world that told me that being gay was wrong. I was listening to all the negative messages in the world that told me that being black, I was less than. And all of those things, all that negativity built up. And I say I was lucky to have a breakdown. I was lucky to get to that point of suicide, because at that point, the question came up about, okay, who actually are you? And I remember being asked the question of who defines you? And I'm sort of like coming up to my 40s thinking, I've never heard that phrase before. No one's ever actually asked me to define myself. I thought I had to be what people expected me to be, not who I could be. And I thought that for me to say this is who I am was selfish. That was my conditioning. That was my thought process. So to get to that point where I'm now saying I am a black gay man has taken a lot of internal battles and struggle and strife. So when somebody says I don't see it or I don't recognize it, you're dismissing that battle. Does that make sense?
I mean, as you're talking there, I'm thinking about, wow, this is so parallel. I had the same thing. Society says trans is misunderstood. It's discriminated against. You're going to be rejected, humiliated. You can lose your house, your car, your wife, your family, everything. Everything's going to go. So being trans is bad, and it's kind of weird. So you carry that through all your life, and this is what keeps this secret in, isn't it? Because you're almost internalizing your own transphobia, your own homophobia against yourself. And thinking, I shouldn't succeed. And then when you're open, I always talk about having this shield where you carry this in front of you going, you won't like me because I'm trans. You won't like me because I'm trans. And that kind of almost like influences every conversation where you're assuming you're going to get discriminated against all the time because you're trans. And the thing that got me out of bed when I was going through a very dark time, I wouldn't say I was thinking suicidal thoughts at any point, but I got to a point where I was seriously could not get out of bed. I could not function as a human being. And the thing that got me off this roundabout that I couldn't get off was saying, I am. And I am is a really powerful thing. I am trans. Then you don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to find a reason in your perspective of why am I trans? It doesn't matter. I just am. And they go, oh, that's the jigsaw. That's the missing piece of the jigsaw. I am. And when you said that just then, I thought, wow, that is so powerful. It's such a powerful thing to have, isn't it?
Yeah, and the beauty of what you're saying there, this is what when I talk about when we work together, is that the labels at either end may be different. You know, whether it's black or trans or straight or gay or male or female, but the process in the middle is exactly the same for all of us. We all have to come to terms with something about our identity at some point. And that, to me, is the key to the bridge building. Finding that point where we all connect and then extrapolating it from there.
Yeah. I mean, I consider myself a bit lucky where privileged. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in countries where English isn't the first language. I've worked in Hong Kong and Singapore, where my skin color has been a minority. I've been in rooms, in meetings, in social situations in Germany where I don't speak German. Everyone has to speak in German. So I know what it's like to be not in part of the conversation. I know what it feels like to feel included. And all of a sudden someone says, oh, Joe, sorry, we've left you out of that. And you go, it's okay. And you'll just sit there mindlessly numb, listening to these people talking German, and you're not included in the conversation. So, and in Hong Kong, I very much felt that I was racially different to the majority there, even though I was working in a kind of a British bank with lots of white people. Out in society, I still found that people were looking at me strange because I was tall, big, white person walking around. And I felt this sort of kind of like weirdness of being unique, if you like, or different. So whilst that doesn't go any way to it's my empathy bridge to you to say, whilst I don't understand what it's like to be black, I can understand what it's like to be excluded or in a minority. And also, because of my trans experience, I know what it's like to have people judge me by not necessarily the color of my skin, but my facial characteristics and my voice and my hand size. And that I get looked at on the tube. I get looked at when I'm doing things. I get looked at when I'm buying a coffee. And I pick up on these body language signs and say, mate, you may feel, well, oh, wow, you're a big black man. Oh. And so you create a reaction. I create a reaction. So that's my empathy bridge. So I can, when you tell me those things, I go, I get it from my perspective. And I understand through my empathy bridge to you what that means.
And then if you take that to the next level, it's almost like, okay, so now you understand what that means. Let's look at how we can work with that. What do we do with that empathy? Right. And when we start to work with that empathy, what we do is we start to value each other's dignity.
Yeah.
And that's where the real work, the real magic for me starts to happen, is when we jump from our difference to our empathy to our dignity. And then it becomes a powerful and profound conversation.
Because we both understand we're both just human beings. We both live, love, want to do a great job, be recognized, be celebrated, and enjoy our lives. We both want to achieve the same. And our brains probably aren't that different. They were both pink or grey, gooey masses you have in your head. The rest of us is just skin and bones. But our intelligence is probably no real difference, just lived experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it's how that stuff is influenced. I mean, some of the work I think I've been speaking to you about recently is working with, I was fostered as a child. And between the 1950s to the early 80s, thousands of Nigerian children were fostered in this country with various degrees of success or failure. And one of the things we're working on now is, how do we get those voices heard? Because you're brought up in two different worlds. You're brought up with a clash of cultures. You're brought up with a clash of your own internal identity. I've got this white experience, then I've got this Nigerian experience, and I'm somewhere in the middle. What does that mean? What is that? Who am I? Who am I?
Yes.
And there's a lot of people in that group. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say this overlapping identity where you're not British, you're not Nigerian, you're kind of an expat in both worlds, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the sad things, I've heard some incredible stories around it, but one of the stories or some of the themes that have come up from it is people who were taken from England to Nigeria, and they're in Nigeria for a few years. They managed to get back to England thinking they're coming back home, but they've now developed a Nigerian accent. And they come back to England and suddenly realize they don't fit in here. They've spent 8 years or so thinking, I don't fit in Nigeria. I'll fit in England when I get back. And then they come back with this accent and suddenly realize they don't fit in here. I mean, if I use myself as an example, when I first came back from Nigeria, I met up with my old school friends and then sat around with them and realized I had nothing in common with them anymore. I mean, they were all willing to help and engage, but I just thought we're on totally different planets. I've had this whole other experience, like, everybody has, but there's nothing that connects us. They've all grown up together. They've been around each other's houses and everything that for the past day. I've been in this whole total different existence. And trying to find a way to fit in and connect. It's almost like you have to go back to basics and restart your life all over again and reform and start new friendships.
So you press pause on your British life. So you did something else, but in the meantime, time continued for everybody who was here. So when you joined back, you pressed pause again and started play, but you were 8 years behind them. And you go, hang on a minute, I expected it to be the same, but it wasn't, was it? And that's
exactly. And that kind of, that's a beautiful way of putting it, but you don't realize consciously that that's what's happening.
Because you're getting off and doing your thing, and you forget that other people are moving on doing their own thing as well. No, that's really interesting. Can I ask you, were your foster parents in the UK, were they black or were they white?
They were white. They were white.
So you had that mixed identity as well. So you're a black child being raised in a white family with not racism as such, but racial. They weren't valuing your racial identity at that point, were they? They were white. No.
Yeah, and they used to make jokes, to me like, don't send him out in the dark. We'll never find him again. Or what's it? We used to watch. I remember watching Tarzan, right? And they would say things like, that's where you come from in the jungle. You're lucky to be living with us, So I grew up for the first few years thinking all black people lived in the jungle, and I was lucky to be living in this village in Kent, little village in Kent. And then the other thing about it was I was going to the Sunday school every Sunday, right? And then when my dad kidnapped me from my foster parents, I went from this white British Kent rural life to suddenly in the middle of Harlesden in London, which was a totally black area. My father was a Muslim, which was a religion I knew nothing about, never even heard of it. So I was in this whole culture. The food was different. The culture was different. The rules were different. I mean, I remember coming home from school one day and there was a packet of biscuits on the table. So I came in, took a biscuit, put on the TV, sat down eating the biscuit. And my dad came in and slapped me around the face. Who gave you permission to put the TV on? You didn't. Who gave you that biscuit? I took it from there. You stole it. And it was suddenly I was in this whole different world. I didn't understand the rules. I didn't know what was going on. And you become a traumatized child. But then, going through all those experiences, I think I'm one of the lucky ones, right? Because I know there's a lot of people that had that experience that ended up in the judicial system or ended up on drugs. And I'm aware of people who've committed suicide because they couldn't reconcile those identities. I'm one of the lucky ones. I've got through the other side and I've come to a point where I can see it, I can understand it, but I can also use that experience to help others to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I'm struggling to build the bridge here because that is such an alien lived experience to me. And I'm rapidly thinking, because I've got other friends who are black, who are fostered by white parents, and they've again grown up with this mixed culture. But to have that sort of that British culture that wasn't quite right for you, to be whisked into a Nigerian culture that again was alien to you at a wrong age, then you're trying to put yourself back into the first culture in a different scenario. That must have been a real mind-bending sense of identity. What's going on in my life? What's my anchor point here? Who am I? Who am I? I am. What am I?
Yeah. And that question, those questions. So go on, Jay.
Yep. You go first. I'll let you talk. Go for it.
No, I was going to say those questions are not always conscious questions. Sometimes they're deep in your subconscious. They're happening underneath the surface. All you're doing is reacting to everything. So you don't even realize that those questions need to be answered.
Yeah. Again, as you're talking, I'm thinking here about the announcement for the BBC last night, Netflix, etc., about pulling Little Britain. Gone with the Wind has now been withdrawn and re-released with different narrative around it. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, let me unpack that. Let me understand what they're trying to say, rather than just have an opinion either way. I want to understand why I've got an opinion. And as I'm sitting there thinking about it, I'm thinking about, I grew up as a white kid in the 60s. I'm 55, so I was born in 1965. And the stereotypical racial portrayal of people in the media, in society, was very fixed. Tarzan was around black people running around the jungle in animal skin underpants, swinging from trees. Basically, monkey type. Gorilla, monkey. Then we have Mowgli, and we had the Jungle Book again. Mowgli is kind of like living in the jungle. So this whole Tarzan thing we had with kids. We grew up in a very white middle class society. So we didn't see black people, or if we saw black people, they were unusual. You go, oh, there's a black person, or the people who are brown, Chinese, Indian, were performing a service role, maybe in a restaurant. Maybe in a lower paid role. So we were brought up with the telly programs, the Alf Garnets, the black and white minstrel shows, the comedy at the time, and that was just how I was brought up, to thinking that was it. So my generation, certainly, I don't know how big my generation is, but for my certain view is that I had no other reference point to people who are black or brown than what I was told by the media. And so now I look at the pulling Little Britain, I'm thinking, yeah, I get that, because what they did was they propagated these racial stereotypes. They exaggerated features, and they did with gay people, and they did with trans people, and they did with women, and disabled people. So that they were literally pulling at the stereotypes and replaying those tropes for comedy. And I thought, well, actually, I took a lot of offense as a trans person at some of their sketches. So I that's just a small part of the bigger picture, just being a trans person. So I now got this empathy bridge thing. Actually, I didn't like that at the time. I didn't like the Are You Being Served, the portrayal of John Inman as a gay man, the way they were using his gayness as comedy. The way that you see drag in performing arts is, yes, okay, I understand drag is a performance culture, but sometimes drag to me can also be a parody of my identity. So I think to recognize in history that that's who we were, I think we need to recognize that, but then we need to put this wrapper of contemporary interpretation of that history and say, this is how the Romans used to invade countries. This is how the Egyptians used to be. This is how colonialists, if you want to call us colonialists, used to be. They used to think they could come into countries, take all of their assets, give them religion, and then leave, and take some slaves back as well, and then assume that the people they've helped are grateful for that. And that's how colonialists behave. And so we can almost categorize our generation as post-colonial, but still living through the ill-gotten gains of suffering and people's lives. So that's how I'm kind of framing it now to try and see it. So it's important to keep these statues with the graffiti on it in a museum, to say, this is what happens when a cultural revolution occurs. We now understand that this stuff is of the past, contextually happened, but we now recognize that it shouldn't happen again.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the arguments I've been saying with people, that we shouldn't get rid of this stuff. We should have a place where we can keep it, where it's recognized that it whether we like it or not, it's a part of our history. And at some point, we have to recognize, if we don't know where we're coming from, how do we know where we're going?
Yeah.
And there's an important part. Yeah, yes, we can remove it from the plinths and wherever. But I mean, I was watching something about Winston Churchill yesterday and how divisive a figure he was. In some areas he was racist. In some areas he was a patriot. He helped Britain through the Second World War. He was an inspiration. He's one of the greatest Britons. So at what point? I mean, what it speaks to me, it goes back to that very same thing of we have multiple layers to our identity. We have the Tate Gallery, which was built on the sugar plantations of Tate and Lyle. Yeah, today you go there and you see some of the finest art in the world. Are we going to tear down the Tate Gallery? Right, where is the balance?
The Egyptian pyramids, Egyptians enslaved half of that region. The Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, all of these people in the past have built countries and societies on the past. And none of us are innocent in that. And we've all benefited from other colonialism, maybe further back in time. And it's about recognizing this colonialism was a point in time and that we need to learn from it and do right where we can.
Yeah. And I look at it, when they're taking down the statues, I see them as symbolic gestures, right? They are symbolic of what people want to be. But if you really want to look at some of this stuff, everything that you almost touch within London or within British society, I look at that, I say, for example, the British lion. Everyone talks about the good British lion, and you thought, where is the lion? Is not even a British animal. Yeah. So the British lion that they hold up to be the British lion is not a British animal. When they say good cup of English tea, where's it grown? Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff within our society that you sit down and think, okay, if you really want to go down that road, how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Well,
because once you start to open up that door,
fish and chips, the potato. The potato came from, was it Walter Raleigh, whoever bought the potato back, didn't he? And the pineapple. I mean, all of this stuff was ill-gotten gains of the colonial sort of path we led.
Yeah, some of the banking institutions that we respect today were the insurers of the slave ships. And you sort of sit there. So you think that if we want to look at this stuff, how far down the rabbit hole. So I see removal of statues as a symbolic gesture or a symbolic recognition of those things, but they shouldn't be the only thing that's done. We pull down that statue. That's it. Everything's fine now. No, it's symbolic, but there is still other stuff that's within the system that is endemic within the system that needs to be addressed.
Do you think there's a desire for change now? Do you think there is a momentum?
I'm an optimist. I like to hope so. I mean, the thing about this that I've had, and I get emotional when I say this, but I've had some incredible conversations with some amazing people and white people as well, right, who have come back and they're asking for guidance. They're asking for understanding. And that's never happened before. When I saw the police officers in America taking a knee and police officers coming out on YouTube saying this is not being done in my name, that has never happened before. And I'm hoping that there's a lot of profound moments that are happening. And I'm hoping that, yes, it does lead to something more significant. Okay? To me, it's opened up the dialogue. And I think that's the first stage. We have to get through. We have to have this dialogue. And it's not going to be an overnight thing. I think everyone's looking for a quick fix solution. Right? If we do this, have we done it? And it's like, it's taken hundreds of years to get here. It's not going to take 5 minutes to get away from it. It's a gradual, slow process.
I was listening to Sadiq Khan the other day about his mission or his passion is to sort of look at statues, road names, etc., etc., etc. And I thought, well, when we talk about inclusion, we're not talking about taking something away from you. We're about giving people more. It's about giving people access. So when I was listening to Sadiq saying we want to look at the road names, we want to look at this, to me it wasn't about removing white names. It was about giving prominence to people of color, to black people, to brown people, to people who've helped us in a more modern time, and celebrating them. And at some point you've got to displace history with modern history. So I thought that was a really symbolic way of saying it's not about condemning the past. It's about recognizing there's a new future, and we can use new names to celebrate new things. And I thought that was quite a powerful way of doing it. As you say, it's symbolic, but it's symbolic to me. But for someone of a black culture, it must be extremely powerful to see people you celebrate, you revere, being recognized in the society you're a part of.
Yeah, and I think when you say that, it's not about moving to a new future. It's about recognizing an unspoken past. Right? It's not about okay, we're now recognizing. It's that we were here all the time. All this stuff had been happening all the time. It's about now recognizing that was going on, recognizing that these historic figures were there all the time. We just didn't acknowledge them. So it's not about moving forward in a new way. It's about recognizing the old way.
Yeah. So let's just take the last 2 years. I think 2 years is probably the time frame. We've had Grenfell Tower, and that significantly was rooted in the black community as being the people in that tower, the people that are mostly affected. Okay, there were other people of all races in there, but predominantly it was a black people were affected the most in that tower. And that was a big, that instigated some level of change of building regulations, and it shone a big spotlight on that social deprivation type issue. And then we've had the Windrush scandal, the unpicking of that. And I watched a BBC drama the other night on that, about that one character and his lived experience. And yes, it was a dramatization, but I felt physically sick. My empathy, everything was triggering, and I just thought the injustice of the way that person was portrayed, the way that people talked to them, the way the white people almost had this "you're guilty, you're just trash, we've got to get you out of this country, whatever you say is a lie" type mentality. And I just thought, we look in shock and horror about Britons who are imprisoned in Iraq or Iran, and imprisoned this school teacher over there for being a spy or whatever. And we're looking at the Iranian culture going, well, they're barbarians. Can't they see this nice white girl is innocent, or this nice Asian girl is innocent? Yeah. We think that it's so barbaric. Yet we, in what we believe is our perfect British justice system, we're doing that to our own people. And I felt physically sick watching that, and I cried at the end of it. I just sat there. I was numb, because that had such an impact of the travesty that our society, and I talk about our society as Brits, everybody, as you, me, and everybody, we are doing to people. And it's incredible we can still do that. And that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. How?
I would even go back a lot. Yeah. I would go back.
COVID's affecting people in a disproportionate way, and how the BBC imagery of showing the people who died recently was disproportionately white, the faces they were showing. And you think, are people not having any sensitivity about understanding the messages that are going out? And then, finally, this the Black Lives Matter, the things that are going on. It's been an evolution over the last 2 years now of as you say, awakening. And sorry, carry on. You were going to say something there.
No, what I was going to say is that when people are saying, and you did it there, we were disgusted and we're now waking up. And I'm like, well, who's we? Because some of us have been aware of this and been saying this for years, all our lives. This is our lived experience. So when there's a we, it's not a we for us. It's, you're just finally recognizing the world we've been talking about for years. And that, to me, is the difference. Right? But even in the language of talking around that change, people are still saying we. And we're sort of, there's not a we, there's a you and an us at the moment.
Right.
Right? We've got to get to the we.
So what's the bridge to get to the we then? How can I use we in a different context?
I would say it's about recognizing the emotion, recognize the injustice, right? And the we for me is people who want change. Right? I speak as a person who wants change. And I stand shoulder to shoulder with people that want change. That's the we. The we that's disgusted and angered, to me, that's an us and them, because we've been disgusted and angered for years. We've been saying it for years. That isn't a we. That's a you and us. But the people that want to stand shoulder to shoulder, want to make a difference, want to change things, want to improve things for the better, that's the we I want to be part of. Okay.
So can I pull up a table at your... Pull up a chair at your table and be we disgusted with you, because I want to join the I am disgusted table now. I want to wake up to this injustice. I want to be part of that change. So that's the table I want to sit at. Those are the conversations I want to have, and that's what highlighted to me that I wasn't at the right table. I've always been on the wrong table, having the wrong conversations.
Yeah, and the other part is be disgusted, but if you're going to sit at the table, come to the table to do something. It's not enough to be disgusted. It's not enough to be angry, because that can go away. It's almost like the Angela Davis quote, it's not about being non-racist. It's about being anti-racist. It's not about being non-discriminatory. Yeah. So it's not enough to say you're offended. What do you do with that?
You can't sit on the fence and take a middle ground. You have to stand for something.
Yeah, that's the important part. Whatever it is.
I mean, you see me speak, and one of the things I talk about is inclusion is holistic, active, and deliberate. You can't be passively inclusive. You can't be accidentally inclusive. By doing nothing, you're saying nothing. By saying nothing, you're letting it pass. So you have to reach out and say, I stand for this. I'm being active about this, and I'm not saying when I talk about holistic, it can't be a bit of you're okay, but you're not. I think it's about recognizing that you've got to be inclusive for all people. At this moment, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, but when we also talk about other things in their context, we can't say, well, Black Lives Matter, but trans lives don't. But this at this particular time, we're talking about Black Lives Matter at the moment, so other things are not relevant in the conversation. But we've also got to look at those things in its own right. We're not trading one hashtag for another hashtag. We recognise that each hashtag has its own message, its own importance that we have to amplify.
And this is going back to that bridge of empathy, right? It may be about Black Lives Matter at the moment, but what happens is once we start to cross that bridge, we recognize that actually other people need to be on this bridge with us, right? Once we've started to have this dialogue, it says, so why can't we now have this dialogue about trans people? Why can't we not have this dialogue about gay people? Why can we not have this dialogue about, I don't know, people with disabilities, right? If we can have this dialogue in this space, we can have this dialogue in other spaces as well. Because what this proves is that we can have the dialogue. That's the important part for me.
Yeah, that's good. That's so right. I was talking to someone the other day in an HR perspective. They had an incident where one of their team made a homophobic remark to another member of their team. And they were wondering about how much of a big deal they should make about this. So I sort of said to them, so imagine they punched them. How would you feel then? Well, that's completely unacceptable. So what's the difference between a punch and words? One you can see, one is visible, one is physical pain, one is emotional, mental, and microaggressions. So is there a difference? And I tried to get them to understand that sometimes words and language are as painful as a physical punch. In fact, sometimes a physical punch is over and done with in 5 minutes and you brush yourself off. And then I said to them, okay, so now we understand that words and actions can have equal impact. If it wasn't a homophobic remark, it was a racist remark, how would you feel now? And they would, it'd be completely abhorrent. That I wouldn't tolerate that at all. So homophobia is okay, but racism isn't. So what we end up trying to do is trying to understand that we have to have a zero tolerance for an holistic inclusion. And by saying that we can't say that racism is bad, homophobia is good, or not so bad. We have to put everything on the table and say all of this is not acceptable in a polite and contemporary society.
Yeah, and that's the dream, the hope to get to, right? And everything. I mean, one of the things I look at is that I'm not here to solve this problem. It may not be solved in my lifetime. In fact, it won't be solved in my lifetime. But what it will be is what we can all do is do our bit to progress it.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at it from
completely.
Yeah, just do your bit to progress it forward.
We all have to take a step forward and keep taking a step forward and keep being visible, active, and deliberate about our actions and being vocal and not letting it pass. Keeping that in tug of war terms, we've got to keep the tension on the rope. Otherwise, we go backwards, and that's what we don't want to do. We've got to keep that tension there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember having a conversation. So I had a conversation with my nephew a while back, and he's a very vocal Black Lives Matter, racism. And I said, you know what? Do you know how much sacrifice was made for you to have that voice? I said, that's the progress. Right? You have that voice, but you don't recognize what has happened to give you that voice. Because there were some of us that grew up in a time where we weren't allowed to have that voice. And if we did speak up, we were beaten down.
Yeah.
That's progress.
It is. We're finding is that people who have voice now, having a voice is a privilege. And that's a privilege that you earned for them. So they've been built. So they haven't earned that right to have that voice. They've been given that voice, whereas you had to earn that voice. So which is where the privilege and not privilege. So, and I think when we look at the people who are vocal today, they're building on the struggles of the previous generation and the previous generation, the previous generation. So you have the privilege of not a multi-generation apart back from the colonial past. I have the privilege of not being part of that colonial past and living in poverty. So I have a voice because I've got an education. So that's a privilege. But you're so right that people should remember that they have a privilege by having a voice, or the freedom to choose, the freedom to express, the freedom to not feel they're going to be arrested, or freedom that they're going to be treated fairly. That again is a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest privileges for me as a black gay man, I know there are countries in the world where I could be stoned to death, I could be killed, or I could be in prison for life. I live in a society where I can say I am a black gay man and say it openly. And that's a privilege. So, privilege looks different in so many different areas. Privilege is not just about color. Privilege can be about status. Privilege can be about the life you're living. And that's what I think people forget. Privilege is on so many different levels.
I love the way you just said that about as a black gay. I don't mean I love you could get stoned to death or arrested to be a gay man. But I love the way you brought that into the conversation, because I, as a trans person, I'm very conscious about where in the world I can be, where I can travel to. If I'm flying to Australia, where can I stop off? Do I go to Dubai, UAE? Is that a safe space for me to go? Could I go via China? Is that safe? I'm not sure. So I'm now double thinking my travel arrangements, my destinations. I did some work in the Ukraine. And I politely asked the conference organizer, would I be safe in Ukraine? And I didn't want to put my bias on there because I assumed that it wouldn't be safe. But you hear some stuff in the press about gay rights in Ukraine and other places like that. So what I wanted to do was make sure that I was safe. And 10 years ago, that wouldn't have even been a conversation. I would have just gone, we're going to Ukraine and turn up as a privileged white person, cis, het, perceived white person. So, and I was sorry, I'm breaking off to my own monologue here. But I was at this LGBT conference, and one of the people on the panel who I believe identified as a gay man, said, yes, when a gay person travels, what they have to do is pack their gayness away in a suitcase while they're away and do their job, then come home and unpack the suitcase again. And I said, well, excuse me, that may be a privilege you have to be able to pack your suitcase, but I wear my transiness, if you like, all the time. Yeah. And the same way that you wear your blackness all the time. You can't not be black today, can you? You can't say, well, today I'm going to go. I'm going to white face today, and it'll be okay. So, it's a really tricky thing that we have to double think this stuff. That people who have a privilege of not having to double think never experience, and that's a real extra burden to our processing power that we have to live every day, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I mean, like you, I've done a lot of work around the world, and there are places that I won't mention the country, but I was going to do a conference there, and they asked me to send through, a pen picture, which they put in their conference brochure. And they were happy with the gay thing, right? Wasn't a problem with that. And then they asked me to send a photograph. And I sent the photograph, and within an hour of sending the photograph, they sent me back a message saying, when you get to the airport, you need to wait at this point, and we will have a police escort to escort you to the hotel.
Wow.
And I was thinking, okay, what's this about? And when I got there, they said there's been a spate of attacks on black people on the transit systems. And they didn't want to risk that happening to me.
Wow. Yeah.
And you sort of sit there and you think, wow, I have to have an armed guard to take me from the airport to my hotel. That is scary.
The only slight way I can relate to that is when I was in Miami. Yeah, I was briefed by the bank I was working for where I could go as a white person, and that's that's my only bit of empathy. And also in LA, downtown LA, and around once you get out of the nice bit of LA, as a white person, I would have to be careful as well. So, but I have the privilege as a white person to be able to go with the rest of the places. So yeah, it's not. But at the time, I thought, so you mean the scary black people down that road? And I've been really careful. So looking back on that was quite a negative experience because it reinforced the stereotype that all black people are bad. If you go down there, and as a white person, you shouldn't dare venture down there. It's like, I'm going to say something which I hope doesn't sound offensive, which inevitably, if you say that, it probably will be offensive. But I almost felt like that was the black zone, the cordon zone. Was it like a zoo or something? Like I couldn't venture in there because I needed bars on the windows or keep the car windows rolled up, put the roof up on the car to venture into those areas. So I was almost like a safari park experience. It's like, is this how I'm feeling now about how that was categorized as stereotyping these different groups? And maybe that's how the people who lived there felt about the segregation and how there was that much of a divide between the two communities or the two populations.
But the interesting thing about that as well, Joe, is that you have that level where we can sit there and we can rationalize it. Right? We can think about it but actually there comes a point for some people where you hit that point where fear kicks in. I mean, look at Amy Cooper recently. The woman with the dog. I mean, she was an Obama supporter, a signed up Democrat. She was part of so many groups. Yet when it came to that point of fear, that stuff just came up from nowhere. Well, it came from somewhere, obviously. And there's a wonderful book by a guy called Studs Terkel, and it's called Race. And basically what Stud does, or did, I think he's dead now, he goes around just interviewing people about a particular subject, and he just writes their monologues. And the opening paragraph on this thing was about a guy talking about his wife. He said his wife was driving down this street, and a group of black guys started shouting at her. Her first response was to lock all the car doors and put her foot down and go faster. He said it wasn't until she got to the end of the road before she realized what they were trying to tell her is that she was going the wrong way down a one-way street. And he said, look, my wife would not say she was racist, but in that moment, it came up. And I said, so when we want to do that work, it's how deeply do we want to get to this stuff? Because we can sit in the classroom and talk about it and say, yes, this is that and that. And everyone goes, yes. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to actually living, there's those points when you find out who you are, if you pay attention. And that's where you know whether or not you've changed.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Yeah, because the inner fight or flight trigger is your default inner self, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had an experience in Germany, actually. I'd left the after party at a conference thinking I knew the way back to the hotel. And somehow my compass must have been pointed the wrong way, because I ended up going completely the wrong direction. I ended up walking through this park. And my mobile phone battery was dead. So I had my sat nav wasn't working. I had my laptop with me, and I had a couple of drinks. I probably wasn't making the best decisions. And I got into this park and it was dark. And as I got further and further, it became blacker, for want of a better way of describing it. It became, I moved out of a white district into a much more racial, diverse, and then more completely black territory. And I was walking through this park, and there were gangs of youths, groups of youths. I mean, gang has its own connotations about the imagery it creates, but there are groups of people who were black gathering in this park, playing with bikes, they were playing music, enjoying each other's company. And I felt really unsafe. One, because I didn't know where I was lost. Two, I was a woman. They were all men. And if I'm really honest and reflect, it wasn't so much they were black. It was just they had this sort of threatening, sort of gangy type in a place that I didn't speak the language, and I was feeling really uncomfortable, and it was dark. And I had to walk through this park twice, because I walked through it and then realized I went the wrong way, and I walked back through it. And I think my biggest fear was as a woman, not as a white person. So I was conscious that I was now walking through a group of people who were men, young men. And I was more worried about it being as a woman than as being a white person. And I think that was and I got out of that park and I got back to my hotel, and I sat there and thought, lesson learned. I'm now a woman. I can't do this. I can't. I'm not invincible anymore. I think if I in my old life as a man, if I'd done that, I'd been more worried about my whiteness. But actually, my primary concern was about my femininity, my gender. But yeah, that's, as you were talking, that's really brought back that fight or flight thing I had, and I was trying to judge it on whether it was racially motivated or whether it was gender motivated. I think it was more gender at the time that I was worried about. But I projected this stereotype onto the people, saying I'm at risk here from sexual violence, for want of a better way, or being misappropriated. I mean, it didn't help that some of them were trying to whistle me and chat me up and talk to me, and I was like, no, just get me out of it. Just get me out of it.
I mean, when you talk about that, that's one of the beauties I talk about, is that it's not about being perfect, but it's about, I mean, the scenario I would give that sort of ties into what you just said there. I'd gone up to Edinburgh to do some work, and it was a great course, great everything. And I'm sitting on the plane at Edinburgh Airport waiting for takeoff, and there's a voice comes over the tannoy. And the voice says, we'll be taking off in about 10, 15 minutes time. We're waiting for whatever we're waiting for. And this is your captain, Mary Jane Smith, right? And it was a female captain. I immediately felt my body tense up. I'm a diversity trainer. I've been teaching this stuff for years, but something about that suddenly thought, oh my God, a woman pilot.
Yeah.
And I froze, and I felt my arms grab the chair, right? And then I sort of, it took me about a minute or two, and then I suddenly stopped and I started laughing, right? And my first thought was, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
And to me, it's not about the feeling, it's about recognizing. The gift is recognizing when it surfaces.
Yeah.
And having the awareness to stop yourself and not to keep following that path. And that's the gift for me, is recognizing that you're not perfect. you've got this stuff by the very nature of your social conditioning. You have got baggage.
Mm.
And it's recognizing that baggage is going to surface every now and again. But are you paying attention enough to recognize when it's happening?
Yeah.
Or are you just following it? Yeah.
It's learning to be able to question your own biases, isn't it? Or your own panic and better press pause, step back. Why do I think that? Actually, that's irrational. That's not logical.
Yeah.
I'm using my biases there. Right, ignore that now. That thought can just go straight out of my head. Right, move on. And it's learn how to press that pause and question yourself, isn't it? And
that is it exactly. Yeah. That is it exactly. Yeah. It's beautiful when you know.
Yeah. It's been fascinating. I mean, we're just to put a timestamp on this, we're sort of early June 2020. We're right in the middle of COVID. We've just had some of the Black Lives Matters erupting around the world. Where are we going now? Yeah, we're coming out of lockdown. The government's under pressure to let us go to the pubs and socialise, and we're reducing 2 meters down to 1 meter. So whilst we're not ever going to change and go back to the way we were, I mean, certainly in terms of what's happened in terms of the Black Lives Matter, in terms of the COVID, in terms of the flexible working, whatever else we do. So where are we going now? What's society going to look like this time next year?
Oh, gosh. Well, thanks. That's an easy one, right?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yeah.
Wow. Do you know something? Joe, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Right? But I recognize we've never been here before. We've never. It's almost like, to me, it feels as a black man, it's like we're touching the goal, and we've never come this close to the goal before. It's unknown territory.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's unknown. It's exciting. I love it. I mean, I love this. The energy behind it is incredible. And I'm hoping that it will create something that we can't go back from. But I don't know what that looks like. I'm just riding this wave. And there was John Amici. I was on TV with him the other day. Said this thing. He said, "Diversity is like pushing a boulder uphill." Right. And there are those of us that have been pushing it for years and years and years. And we're pushing it. And it's a slow push because it's a heavy boulder. Things like this come along and a few more hands join. And it becomes a little easier to push it up the hill. But the question is, how long do those hands stay with us? Right?
And how much hill is left? Yeah.
And how much hill is left? Or how much hill are we going to move up?
Yeah.
And that's the exciting thing is there are now loads of hands on this boulder.
Yeah.
And it's about how do we maximize? And this is where people like yourself and myself and other people that do this wonderful work come into our own. Right? This is where we're now the motivators. We're now the come on, you can do this. We know what we want. We've, to use Martin Luther King, we've been to the promised land. We've seen the mountain. We've been to the mountaintop. We know what the goal can be. Right? And it's just helping people get there.
Yeah, it's standing at the top, looking down, saying, "Come on, we're not far. Yeah. We can do this." And then making sure that the way down isn't full of crocodile pits on the way down either. Because once you get over the top, we've got to make sure that the journey, the other side, is safe. Because we can't fall down a crevice and go back to the start again. This is not snakes and ladders where we make all this gain and then we drop down a hole. Yeah.
Exactly. And the sadness to this, and this kind of links into something I was watching this morning, is that there are people out there that seem hell-bent to destroy this. And you see some of the stuff that's going on. I mean, there was a video that's come out this morning of a group of people attacking 2 police officers in London. And it is vile. The officers are on the floor, and these people are dancing around them with their mobile phones. And you sort of look at something like that, and you think, and there were black youths. That was what was so annoying. And you sit there and you think that gives certain people permission to take their hand off the boulder.
Mm.
And that's the sadness. That's the sadness for me.
Yeah. I mean, without detracting anything from what you just said, I see that in my own life. It only takes one celebrity to start banding around negativity, and it then calls into question the legitimacy, and plays back into that trope that, you know, black people are angry, aggressive people, trans people are predators. You know, it allows people to start playing on those tropes to seed that division again. You say, try and removing hands from that boulder to allow it to roll back, because they've got a protected interest in keeping that boulder backwards, not forwards. So that's what we see all the time.
Yeah. Quick question for you. If I may. Are you aware of the J.K. Rowling comments?
I am, and as we were talking, that was the person, and the fact that Daniel Radcliffe took in there as well and posted stuff. So yeah, it's the J.K. Rowling type visibility that makes MPs, lawmakers, policymakers kind of scared, because they think just because someone's got a high profile, they've got a higher mountain to shout from sometimes, and that's the kind of person that does more damage. Whereas the other side of that is it creates angry activists that don't do sometimes the cause a favor, because they're giving people a reason to think, oh, actually trans people are dangerous, they're angry, they're just this, that, and the other, and you almost like reinforce the stereotype. And it's making sure that we amplify the good voices and attenuate the bad voices, and learning to ignore J.K. Rowling and saying, she has an opinion. It's not my opinion. It's not the opinion of the world. And actually, just because she writes good books doesn't mean say she's an expert.
Yeah. And the other side of that as well is about, and I've learned this recently, very much recently, giving yourself permission to be angry. Right? Yeah, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be frustrated. It's not okay to be destructive. And I got that from, I had a friend who, you know, when this first happened in Minneapolis with the knee on the throat, the whole of that weekend, I was really, really angry. And a friend of mine, she's a very good friend at reflecting back what she sees. And she goes, I've never seen that before. She goes, what? She goes, you were angry, but it was a focused anger. You were angry that you wanted to do something. You didn't want to destroy something. You wanted to build something from this. And I think that's the thing, is about recognizing that, yes, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to be pissed off. But what do I do with that? What do I do with it? Because that's what gives me the permission to move forward. That's what motivates me. If I just sit with it and allow it to sort of like just do nothing, then it becomes destructive. It's about, I'm angry, but what am I going to do with it? And I think if anything for me, that's the biggest lesson that's come out of this for me. I have every right to be angry.
Wow. That is a powerful close. Amazing. Thanks, G.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone who's listening is going to agree that there's a lot to ponder there and take inspiration from. And it's okay to be angry. It's what we do with that anger that's the important thing, how we focus that. So how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, you can get in touch with me on my email, which is info@purplefrog-connections.com. Or you can check out my LinkedIn profile. I'm sure that you will have my name spelt on your website or on the podcast. Either of those, or you can contact me via Twitter. Purple Wisdom is my Twitter handle. More than happy to talk there. Or my website, www.purplefrogconnections.com. Awesome.
I'm sure many people are going to be in contact with you. It's been extreme privilege to have this just over an hour with you today and hear your thoughts and insights. And also a huge thank you to the listeners for tuning in and listening. Please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Please tell your friends and your colleagues. I have a number of exciting guests lined up over the next few weeks and months that I'm sure you'll also be inspired by. But remember, if you'd like to be a guest, then please let me know. I'd also welcome any feedback and suggestions you may have to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. And so, to wrap up, my name is Joanne Lockwood, and I've been your host today, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So catch you next time. Bye.